I want to be upfront about something before I start. Everything I presented in this Dusty Truth series is, up to this point, built strictly on verified primary source data. The IGRF, geomagnetism numbers, official flight logs, emergency high latitude landings, the software calibration loops. I don't want to present anything to you that I cannot back up with mainstream schematic or a data sheet. But tonight is different. Tonight I'm sharing what I believe is actually occurring. I'm building a model. It is a working theory and it is not finished, but based on every single piece of engineering and physics data I've audited over the last decade, this is exactly where the compass is pointing. Let's start with what absolutely nobody disputes. First, the aclinic line, the magnetic equator. This is the path around the Earth where the magnetic field lines run perfectly flat, horizontal to the ground. 0 degrees of magnetic dip. That is standard mainstream NOAA data that you can look up. Second, the Coriolis effect is mathematically 0 at the equator. The sine of 0 degrees is 0. That's textbook physics. Third, hurricanes do not form within 5 degrees of the equator. And when a massive storm approaches the equator, it doesn't smoothly slow down. It doesn't weaken or drift across. It deflects away. It behaves like it hit an invisible wall. Nobody argues with any of these facts. Not the university professors, not the meteorologists, not the cartographers. But this is where my interpretation begins. The standard textbook explanation tells us that there simply isn't enough rotational spin at the equator to sustain a hurricane. The Coriolis force drops to 0, so the storm just can't get its twist. But I want you to use your raw spatial logic and think about that for a second. A Category 5 hurricane has internal winds screaming at 150 miles per hour. It's carrying an unfathomable amount of internal angular momentum. If the equator is just a neutral zone, a completely empty, passive mathematical line on a globe, why doesn't a storm with that much massive kinetic energy have the power to drift right across it on standard steering winds? It doesn't drift, it bounces. That is not the behavior of a neutral zone. That's the behavior of a boundary. In my model, the equator is a physical fence line between two counter-rotating field systems. The northern field rotates in one direction, the southern field rotates in the opposite direction, where they meet at the aclinic line. Two massive opposing rotational currents pressing against each other like gears. That's why an atmospheric vortex cannot cross. It's not a lack of force, it's a collision of two high-intensity field concentrations with a weaker compressed zone running right through the middle. In mainstream plasma physics, they have a specific name for this exact geometry, a magnetic bottle. Engineers use it right now in fusion research to confine high-energy plasma currents. The equator, being the weakest point between the two major field concentrations, is entirely consistent with being the dielectric boundary zone between two opposing systems. And finally, the gyroscopes. Maximum mechanical drift at the poles, 0 drift at the equator, the famous sign of latitude formula. Mainstream science points at that 15 degrees per hour drift and declares, see, that proves rock is spinning underneath the instrument. But Ernst Mach, a physicist whose work Albert Einstein openly credited as the literal foundation of relativity, documented that exact same mathematical result is produced if the observer is stationary and the field is rotating around them. The math is identical either way. In this working model, a high-precision gyroscope is not detecting a spinning rock. It's detecting the rotational torque gradient of the electromagnetic medium it's sitting inside. Maximum torque at the polar center where the field is tightly wound and dense, and zero torque at the equatorial boundary where the two opposing rotations cancel each other out. So, the sign of latitude doesn't describe the speed of a ball. It describes the density of the gradient perfectly. So I want to be completely straight with you about where this stands. The observations are verified. The interpretation is mine, along with some of the other researchers that I've been following and working with. I'm not here to tell you that the replacement model is 100% proven. I'm here to tell you that this is where the physical evidence points when you strip away the textbook assumptions. Falsifying a broken model doesn't require me to have a perfect finalized replacement ready in my pocket, but I am building one with the help of others. And this is what the blueprints look like right now. The field is real. The asymmetry is documented. The boundary behavior is observable. The geometry fits. You can decide what it means. I'm not here to tell you what to think. I'm just here to show you the observations, and the research that's been done is showing that there's an alternative model that makes a lot more sense and matches reality a lot better than living and walking on a spinning ball and then being convinced that you'd fall off a flat earth even though you've never fallen off a flat floor in your life, unless you're just out of balance.